Okay, we are live, Renia. This is exciting. We are live. Welcome, everybody in the group to this amazing talk with myself and Renia. We are launching our 5 live series of the 5 top things we want every parent, every new parent, or recurring parent to know from a mindset and breastfeeding perspective. Renia, hello, welcome.
Hello, Victoria, and hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Victoria and I are really just excited to start talking to you guys.
Yeah. I'm excited to have this, like fireside chat about bonding and connection today. And for anyone that is listening live, you'll be able to share your thoughts, your questions with us, and we're happy to respond. But let's get to it. I was thinking and so excited how beautiful to start with bonding and connection, Renia, because even from the beginning, before baby's even born, right, there's bonding and connection going on.
Absolutely. Any pregnant person will tell you that that's the formation of your relationship with your child, and that starts the bonding for sure. And in discussing bonding, Victoria and I had talked about, what does that mean? What is bonding? And so I'd like to share a definition about what bonding is with all of you. And it comes from our good friends at Merriam-Webster. Essentially, bonding is the formation of a close relationship as between a mother and a child, or between a person and an animal, especially through frequent or constant association. And that can look very different for different families and different relationships. But the key component here when it comes to bonding is that there is indeed a relationship.
Yeah, I love it. And so I have a question for you, just someone who is an expert, right? When, like, I know that when a baby is in the womb, right, it is like so important. There's a connection, of babies in the womb, right? And a feeling of there's an obvious physical connection, inextricable. However, when a baby's born, right, they're separate, but they're still very, very connected. Mm-hmm. And what would you say is like goes on for parents that you work with around bonding with their baby? Is there one way to bond, or are there many ways?
Well, that's a great question, Victoria. There is not just one way. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is that it can happen in a series of different ways, or a combination of ways, depending on the dynamic between parents. Now, in my line of work, right, I've been a nurse for 16 years, and a lot of that time frame has been spent in the labor and delivery realm of things, right? So you have your baby, and there I am helping you through that process, not just to deliver your child, but also to connect with your child after the baby's born. And so that can start immediately after the birth of a child by offering what's called skin-to-skin contact. It is a very well-developed, well-researched phenomenon that really just allows for us to understand one component of bonding, which is skin and skin touching, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a physicality to it, but there is also that allows for an emotional connection, or rather that relationship between you and your child to begin. Yeah. And that's where it starts. Yeah. It can start as early as the womb. And when it comes to extra uterine life outside of the womb, skin to skin contact is the very first way you can do that. And by the way, skin to skin contact is not only exclusive to mothers. A lot of people think that. That is untrue. Skin to skin contact can be done with either or both parents. So it's something I really want to reinforce. And that's one way we can start with connecting, right? But when it comes to expanding what that connection could be, we go beyond just the skin to skin contact. And this is, I feel like, where I'm going to invite you, Victoria, to offer the same when it comes to parenting, because as a child grows, that skin to skin contact can be translated into hugging and embracing. It can be translated into eye contact, touch with hands, hand holding, arm around your child. So that contact is still there. It just looks different as you progress and grow with your child.
Absolutely. As you talk, before we even get to when the kid is older, right? I even think about, and you can probably speak to this a little bit more, the breast crawl, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, when we think about connection and bonding, one of the things that I notice quite often is, parents don't always know what kind of relationship do they want to have with their child, right? And many times we kind of tell and we declare and we share, we say what the baby's going to do. But the baby actually, and you can share a little bit about the breast crawl, right? Like very naturally, like knows what to do in an effort to connect, right? In an effort to gain nutrition and connection. And when we talk about bonding and connection, allowing children to have that self-agency to, allow them to have skin-to-skin contact as soon as they're born, if that's possible, right? We can talk a little bit about situations where that's not possible. And then allow the child to maybe do what, babies do in that regard. So I think that, even from the very beginning, setting that relationship up where the child is not an extension, but the child is, someone that is related to you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It actually comes from a very primitive place. It's one of the basic human needs, is that feeling of connection and belonging, right? So to your point, Victoria, when it comes to what we call the baby crawl, when babies are born, they can be placed on a mother's abdomen, and they will slowly find their way up to this upper chest area. It happens very slowly and progressively, but it happens. It can happen. You can Google it and YouTube it, and you can find videos of the baby crawl in a lot of different venues and platforms. And instinctually, it is because a child is looking for actually two of their basic human needs met, one of which is that bonding and connection, and the other of which is food, right? And that's how it ties into breastfeeding, because as a baby crawls up and up and up and lands here in the chest area, conveniently, they start to smell food and will slowly start to wiggle their way over to the breast to look for food.
Yeah, it's incredible just to think about that. But it doesn't happen instant. Maybe it might take a little while. So okay. So that's the thing, right? It's going back to mindset, taking into account what you just said and thinking about the mindset of, allowing space and time and not, creating anxiety around, oh my gosh, it's not happening yet, So it doesn't happen instantaneously. But it does happen. What about parents who can't, for various circumstances, babies, have a very traumatic birth, and can't necessarily have that skin to skin contact? What do you think about that?
There is no time limit or frame on connection. Yes, does the research support providing that immediately? Sure, but we have to take all things into consideration. And like you said, traumatic birth, and even something as scheduled as a cesarean section. Let's use that as an example, because that rate is increasing in America. It doesn't mean that you can't bond with your child when you have the physical capacity mutually, and that's a key piece. You mutually have the capacity physically to be connecting, then you pick up right there. So
I love that.
So to your point, Victoria, whether it's a cesarean section or your child ends up in potentially an intensive care unit, okay, you can still provide that skin to skin contact with your child when the time and logistics allow for that. I'd like to speak really intentionally into the special care units and the intensive care units, kangaroo care, which is very synonymous with skin to skin care, in which case you place the baby, a component of the baby, an arm, a cheek of the baby close to you. That allows for connection as well. So it does not have to be any one which way. The opportunity, it eventually presents itself and allows for that connection to happen. So I'm really glad you brought that up, Victoria, because this isn't cookie cutter.
No. And I think sometimes we have this idea that it has to be a certain way, and there's this, perfect way for it to happen, right? And then because certain things happen, we kind of get stuck, right, in that how it should be. And in speaking to mindset, there are many, and really parallel to what you were just saying, there are many situations where, for whatever reason, we can talk a little bit more as children get a little bit older, when a baby's outside of you, right? And now you have this baby. If a person is not feeling, if a parent's not feeling the bond right away, right? The absence of that, there's always this anxiety that the absence of that is going to screw up the kid, and the idea is that there's a repair that can happen. It's the part that is most important, which is the repair. It's not so much the rupture or the fact that it wasn't there, because many things happen after birth. I mean, you can speak to this as well, hormonally, and just how mothers and fathers feel. The bond instantly is not always there. Is that true?
Absolutely. I can speak to that. That's a very personal situation for me. After my son was born, I did not feel that connection with my son immediately, despite, by the way, folks, the skin to skin care immediately after birth.
Yeah, I'm sure you did everything by the book.
Yeah. And so I'm the nurse, and I'm the conscious, professional who knows what I need to do, but I'm not feeling that. What's going on? It took me a good couple of weeks to feel that level of connection with my child. And breastfeeding was actually, for me personally, breastfeeding was a very big part of that. Allowed for that.
The connection.
Absolutely.
Can you share a little bit more about that then? There are lots of parents who are thinking about, should I breastfeed? Should I not? The research says this, but I don't know. And, how does someone make that decision? And what are the factors that are important to consider? And where does bonding and connection fit into all of that? Start with one of those questions.
I mean, they're all related. So even though they're questions, they're all related. So first and foremost, I will tell you that we have many, many, many documented resources that say, yes, breastfeeding is best. Breastfeeding, yes, we know that from a nutritional standpoint. But what we also need to realize is that it's not just nutrition that you're giving your baby, right? Albeit they're also getting really powerful antibodies. Antibodies are those like fighter cells in your body that really, it's protection. It's protection for your child. So if there's any reason to breastfeed, I'm going to say very comfortably that giving your child that protection should be number one. But that protection is not just biological, okay? Not from a metabolic or physiologic standpoint. That protection is also emotional. And so when you are making contact, right, whether it's skin to skin or not, by the way, okay, when you're making that contact with your child in the attempts to breastfeed, that is also feeding your child. It's feeding your child love. It's feeding your child protection, not just internally, but that feeling of protection by being close to their parent, right? It's strengthening their ability to trust. I have a need, says the baby. I need food. You are providing that need to me. I trust you. So you can see how that also contributes to just a child who developmentally and emotionally is richer because they receive those things.
Mm-hmm. And what about for those that can't breastfeed or choose not to?
Great question. Connection does not, or I should say, breastfeeding is not the only road to take to be able to connect and to bond with your child. Mm-hmm. Previously, I had mentioned embrace and touch as a component to that. So if you choose not to breastfeed, embrace your child, hold your child, make skin-to-skin contact with your child. You can do all of those things.
Yeah.
And continue to make eye contact with them from as early as birth. That allows for the same type of feeding, and not just nutritionally, but emotionally.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a beautiful quote, and this comes from lots of psychoanalytic literature, but the baby does not know itself but through the eyes of the mother. And when the baby's in the womb, very connected, when outside of the womb, still very connected, and baby looks to the mother and or father or whoever the caregiver really is, because there's so many different kinds of caregivers, right? And only knows themselves through the reflection that they see in their, parents or caregivers' eyes, right? So if we are scowling, they see that being reflected. If we are, happy or joyous or bright and open, they see that reflected upon them. And when we talk about development and the importance of connection in that way, it is of utmost importance, especially in the beginning. Yeah. And, what I keep coming back to is, and maybe you can share your thoughts. We're talking about the optimal, right? The importance of bonding and connection. What about people who are saying to themselves, and you actually shared that you had this experience of not instantaneously bonding with your son, and all of the different thoughts and sensations and feelings that go along with that. How were you able to work through that? And what do we suggest for parents who are going through that right now?
It's a great question. I think an important thing to take into consideration is, what you want your ultimate outcome to be, right? So if you want your outcome to be, I want to feel connected with my child, you can then look to all of the steps that you can take to get there, right? And we can use this information in any department of our lives, right? What is your outcome? And then scale back and say, what are the steps I need to take to get there? Now, what we have to remember, whether we're talking about breastfeeding or we're talking about connecting or anything, everyone has their own unique journey.
Yeah.
And for me, it was quite honestly that I knew what I wanted my outcome to be. Mm-hmm. Take one road and take a detour if I needed to, and then make a U-turn and then a K-turn, and make all right the road, the journey. And for me, staying focused on what I wanted the outcome to be without judgment, self-judgment. Right? Because that can lie pretty heavy within a parent.
Oh, yeah.
So without self-judgment and giving yourself the grace to just eventually get there.
Yeah. So you just said exactly, it's like we're connected with one brain. You just said exactly what I was thinking, Renia, right? And we're going to talk about this in one of the other lives, which is about support connection, and connection to others. But, thinking about, I always say we can't give a child something we don't have ourselves. It's like when a parent comes in, they're like, my toddler keeps screaming. And I'm like, well, look at what you're doing, we're going to co-escalate or we're going to co-regulate, right? So we have to first over here be regulated in some way if we're going to, somehow model that. And that takes work, right? And so the first thing I think about is just practical support, right? How many parents just need practical support, like a baby nurse or, support from family to just take a shower or, have a meal in silence, right? Or just to have a moment to themselves. So I think about, what do you need to take care of yourself so you can fill up, so you can have a reserve to actually give your baby who wants so much from you? And then what are the people around you? Like, who are the people around you that you can ask for support? I think that having people, and you can also speak to this, having people who understand the ambiguity of the situation, maybe they've been through it themselves, like friends. It doesn't always have to be a professional, right? But somebody who understands and just gets it, to hear what you're going through. What do you think about that?
I think that's really important. And I to your point, yes, we're going to dive into that deeper in a future talk. But I learned that lesson early on in nursing school, as a matter of fact, Victoria, in that when there's nothing here, there's nothing to give.
Right.
So I think, to speak to it personally, I think for me, what delayed a little bit of my ability to connect with my child was that it happens for a lot of women postpartum, which is essentially like, I don't know what's going on. I'm not pregnant anymore. Who am I now? Now I'm a mother. And for me, my son was my first child. And so that was the harder part. It's like, I don't know who I am. I'm a wife. I'm a mom now. And who's Renia? Who is she? So it was just a matter of giving myself the grace to figure out who that was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I encourage the same for everybody else. Just acknowledge the ambiguity. Acknowledge it and say, I don't know what is happening. I don't know what. You can even acknowledge the fact that you don't know what the outcome is. Mm-hmm. I had talked about that before. It's like, I don't know what I want. I don't know. But I know how I want to feel. I want to feel rested. I want to feel taken care of. I want to feel a connection with my child. And how do I look to, like you said before, how do I look to the people around me to help me? And how do I do that independently? How can I do that independently? Mm-hmm. And that's very different for different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if I always like thinking about how, and I love what you said, is that when you become a parent, it's a different role. And we always say, children, babies their brains are sponges, literally. It's the only way that they grow is when there's actually input, right? Neurologically. And for people that don't know that, right? If you think about children in orphanages where there's very, very little contact, where, lots of isolation, the brain, even though children were born, with a fully capable brain with the capability to develop normally, because of the lack of input, their brains were actually not developed and they were smaller. And so the brain on a neurological level is like a sponge when we're babies. And what I find when I work with, adults, they're so scared that they can't change, that like now they're in this new parent role. Well, I'm already developed. But we're not made of stone. I always say, we're not made of stone. Our brains may not be like sponges, but we're able to rebuild and reform inside of relationships. And I think, babies and children teach us that, how to shift and kind of trust the journey. I like what you said, which is acknowledge the ambiguity. And I say, trust the journey inside of the struggle of that. Yeah.
So Victoria, we talked about some practical ways that we can allow for connecting and bonding as it's applied to a newborn and to a breastfeeding parent. Are there things that you can suggest to parents of older children as
In
far
terms of bonding and connection?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that bonding and connection changes as children get older. You often hear, as children start to talk or walk, all of a sudden it's this other being or organism that has its own mind, right? And so you don't really know how to interact with it because no longer are you picking it up and taking it wherever you want it to go. But now they have their own mind, and developmentally things happen that might challenge you as a parent. So my tip around bonding and connection is really to get clear. And it can be working with a professional who is skilled at that, or reading literature, which I can certainly recommend. But get clear on what are the normal developmental things that kids are going to do because they're kids. And really wrapping our minds around the fact that some of their behaviors, actually most of their behaviors, are all forms of communication of something. And a lot of them are the result of them just exploring the world and the boundaries that they're inside of this world, right? And so if we can just kind of separate and not make it so personal, I think what it creates, Renia, is the space between all of the challenging things that start to happen as kids start to get older and how we feel about it. And when we create that space, inside of that space, we can kind of play, right? We can kind of say, okay, this is not personal. My, terrible twos have now turned into like teenager threes. And now it's like teenager fours, and like, what the hell is going on fives? And then they're 13 and they're still like pushing buttons. Like, what's going on? Well, all of these things are very normal in many different ways, and as much as we can just wrap our minds around it, right? So that would be my first tip: is just get educated. And the second thing quickly is to really get clear. And again, this can come in the form of speaking to someone who you really love, who knows you well, or speaking to someone who's a trained professional, but getting clear on how the past has impacted your present and your parenting, because we all have stuff. Nobody gets out of childhood alive, so to speak, in that way. And so we bring it, right? Anything that's unhealed, I say we bring it to our relationships with children. And what's interesting in my work is that 99% of the time, the issues that parents have with their kids are actually inside, they're all related to some sort of unhealed something within that parent, right? So it will always arise and come up. So as much as we can take care of ourselves, right? And really do that work. And that's why I think working with someone prior to having a family, whether in your own therapy or in a couple situation where you can just explore those things, and not that you'll ever be 100% ready, but at least you'll know when it's happening. You're like, oh, okay, I know why I do that, or I know why that triggers me. So those are my two top tips for that as children are getting older. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Such a rich conversation that could certainly go beyond.
I know.
Beyond this talk, and we want to offer that to you guys. So for those of you that are watching, please just know that you will certainly have the opportunity to connect with Victoria, myself, either or both, for additional consultations and conversations if you should choose to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited, Renia, for us to continue our live series. Next week, we're going to be on, right? On Tuesday.
At 2 p.m.
Right, at 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited for that. And for everyone that's watching, please check out the feedback form that is inside the introduction to this. We would love to hear your thoughts, questions, anything that might have come up for you during this talk, and reach out to both Renia or I if you have any questions before next week. Renia, is there any last word before we end? My little puppy thinks that we should end soon.
Hey, Rania. I think the thing I'd like to share is just stay open to possibility when it comes to connecting.
I love that.
With that.
I love that. And I will end it there because that was beautiful. All right, Renia, we will speak again next week.
Thanks
Bye,
for
everybody.
everybody. Bye.